Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, police reform, how driving is changing. But first, the impeachment of Governor Tom Wolf. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a number of important topics to take up today on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. But first, Marc Levy, he's a reporter with the Associated Press. He joins me to get into some of these important subjects. Welcome to the program, Marc.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we have some big topics to discuss. Let's start with an impeachment resolution, I should say 5 of them, introduced by a Butler County State House member, Darrell Metcalf. Five different articles of impeachment on the table. For our audience, describe a couple of them and what their intention is, despite the fact that, and then later we can talk about whether they go anywhere in the legislature or not.
Sure. So, for instance, one of them basically says that Governor Tom Wolf's shutdown orders violated people's constitutional rights to property, to gather, to speak freely. Another one of them says his waiver program that allowed some businesses to appeal the shutdown and reopen was arbitrary and capricious. All of the impeachment articles are under the constitutional definition of misbehavior in office, which is an extremely broad definition. But they are that's sort of the direction of them all with respect to how the governor handled the state's response to the coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I went back and looked at some history books. I couldn't find a governor in Pennsylvania that was impeached throughout our entire history. The second point is that, you know, it takes a majority in the House and 2/3 in the Pennsylvania Senate. I mean, is this likely? You follow the legislature as closely as anyone. Is this likely to go anywhere? It doesn't seem to me that it has, I'll put it this way, legs.
So it's going to take an extraordinary amount of determination for a committee to take this and to research it and to explore it and to come up with articles that I would recommend to the full House. And for this to even get out of the House, as you said, it would take a majority vote. And there are a number of even Republicans from more moderate parts of the state that haven't questioned the governor's behavior or the governor's response to the coronavirus. So, yeah, it's got high hurdles. It has a long road, and and I can't even remember when articles of impeachment have been introduced against a governor, not to mention actually resulting in conviction.
All right, I want to talk about the dearth of people of color being elected to statewide office. Now, this year we could have a change for the first time in the history of the state. Now, we've had appointment, but not election. Go with it.
Yeah, so both major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, just nominated a person of color to be their candidate for Auditor General in the November election. On the Democratic side, it is Nina Ahmed of Philadelphia. On the Republican side, it is Tim DeFore of Dauphin County. One of them will be elected unless something unexpected happens, but one of them will be elected and would become the first person of color, the first person who's a member of a racial minority to serve atop an executive branch or in an elected executive branch position. So nobody who has been elected to governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, or auditor general has been a person of color.
Yeah, that's quite a history. They tell me we're out of time. Obviously we'll have you back, and there are many other subjects we can take up. But that's an extremely, an important question in a state that does have, great diversity in terms of its demographics, and it looks like history's about to change.
Yes, and both Nina Ahmed and Tim DeFore see it as a sign of the times and a good thing for Pennsylvania.
All right. Well, look, as always, thanks for coming on the program. All right, coming up, police reform. It's moving through the Pennsylvania legislature, and we'll take that subject up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, joining me now is Representative Jordan Harris. He represents a district in the city of Philadelphia. He's the House Democratic Whip. And Representative Harris, I will tell you, I was in some ways stunned that the Pennsylvania House Judiciary Committee approved a couple of bills dealing with police reform. Not that they approved them and sent them to the full House, but they did it unanimously, considering what's going on in Congress right now. Were you surprised by that?
Well, you know, members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus held an action on the floor of the House, led by Representative Summerlee out of Allegheny County, to shed light on the fact that we could not continue with business as usual in the chamber and not discuss issues of police accountability and police brutality. From that, we met with members of the leadership in the Republican side of the aisle to talk about what we could start to move. And these were just two, as I'd say, down payments on us actually addressing the issue of police accountability. So, you know, I'm grateful for Chairman Kaufman for running the bill and Leader Cutler. But this is just a down payment. There's a lot more that needs to be done to address police accountability. Yeah. But moving these two bills is a step in the right direction. Yeah,
that's a great point. At least you were able to get a start. And I was going to come back after we talk about what's in the bill now, what's in these two bills, just to give us an overview of them. I was going to ask you, I'm sure there's more to be done and there may be differences that emerge, but I'm just delighted that the first steps have been taken and it's bipartisan. That's not something that regularly occurs in the Pennsylvania legislature. All right, let's get to it then. Let's talk. Give us an overview of some of the important highlights of the bills.
So there were two bills that were merged into two existing bills. One was Representative Jason Dawkins' bill that was merged into a bill. And that bill says that basically police officers should get mental health evaluations every other year, and that they should get them within 30 days of use of deadly force. We know that police officers are seeing horrendous things on a daily basis. But how often are we asking if they are all right mentally? How often are we making sure that they get the mental help and that is needed to deal with the stress that comes with that job? So this bill requires those things. The second bill is Representative Chris Rabb's database bill. We believe that had this bill been law a few years ago, young Antoine Rose from Allegheny County would still be alive. This bill basically creates a database for police officers who have misconduct complaints against them, and it follows them. So what will happen is if a police officer decides to go to another police department, that police department would have to search this database to see if the officer is in there. And if they decide to go ahead and hire the officer, even though the officer has misconduct charges, they would have to fill out a form basically saying that they know that the officer had these misconduct charges, and this is the reason why they move forward to hire them anyway. So it'll be clear as day when there are officers who are out there who have misconduct charges against them, there will be a database where folks can go and see that. So when the next department is hiring a person, they know what type of officer they're getting.
Yeah, let me go through a couple of other aspects and tell me whether they're in the bill or you think they're going to emerge. Let's talk about body cameras and their use. Are they? I didn't think that they're not. Are they in the current? I didn't think so.
No, they're not in either of these current bills, but there is a package of bills that have been put together by a police reform working group, which is legislators from both the East and the West, and some local legislators and attorneys that have worked together on a document. And in that document, there are a piece of legislation that we're supporting that do talk about body camera footage and other types of footage.
Yeah, the other issue is, and it's fairly complicated. I'm going to hold you over for another segment if you're willing to stay on. And maybe we'll take that up in the next segment. It's called qualified immunity. It's very complicated. It's being debated in Washington. Why don't we do this? Let's run to a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about qualified immunity and some other aspects of proposals that, as you point out, that have been introduced but are not in the current piece of legislation. All right, we'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, I'm chatting with Representative Jordan Harris. He's the Democratic whip. He represents a district in Philadelphia, and we're talking about police reform. It's moving through the Pennsylvania legislature. 2 bills came out of the House Judiciary Committee. Unlike what we've seen in Washington and the nation's capital, where the Democrats and Republicans are really at odds over police reform, in the Pennsylvania legislature, at least initially, 2 bills came out of the House Judiciary Committee unanimously, something that I think surprised a lot of us. And Representative Jordan Harris has been deeply involved in police reform. All right, Representative Harris, there's something called qualified immunity that protects police officers from lawsuits and potential damages that they would have to pay. And that basically comes out of Supreme Court decisions back in the 1960s. But is there any aspect of qualified immunity that's in these 2 bills? And if not, what do you think the possibilities that police would continue to have this sort of protection?
So there are several other pieces of legislation that we're looking to move forward. I've introduced a bill around eliminating qualified immunity because of what you just noted. We believe that we can do some things on a state level that changes how we do qualified immunity. When it's seen that the police officer has gone beyond the pale of their authority, there has to be some type of recovery that can happen from the person that they agreed. But not only for the officer, but for municipalities. If you're hiring bad officers, you should be held accountable. If you're looking in that database and you're seeing that the officer has a track record and you still go ahead and something happens, the police departments should be able to be held accountable for those things. It's the only way that things will be changed is when people see that they're being held accountable for their actions from a financial standpoint as well. But Terry, I want to tell you, there are also other things that we have to do if we really want to address policing. We have to deal with Representative Summerlee and Ed Gainey's use of force bill. We have to have a statewide policy on what use of force is in Pennsylvania, and not this hodgepodge of from one police department to the next. We have to have a statewide policy on what use of force looks like. We got to talk about declassifying and decertifying police officers who are not doing the right thing. We have to talk about making police officers mandated reporters. Right now, if I'm a school teacher and I suspect child abuse, I am mandated by law to report that to the authorities. Why is it that a police officer can see a crime happening from one of their fellow officers and they're not required to do anything?
Right.
If we're going to restore faith and trust in policing and in communities across this Commonwealth, we have to address these issues, and we have to address them now.
All right, look, before I let you go, look, I don't think there's any doubt that we still have institutionalized racism in America. But, beyond that, there are other aspects that ought to be worked on and stressed and emphasized. I've spent my whole life in higher education and a belief that education is particularly important. And I'm not saying everybody ought to go to college, but it seems to me that making sure that there's access and that quality education is provided to people of color and all of us in the country is extremely important. We know what education does in terms of, the ability to earn a living, the ability to support a family. You get it. What aspect of that strikes you as important?
Well, I think what you see happening from the civil unrest in the Commonwealth, and this is, Black Lives Matter rallies from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh to small cities in between, where you never think you would see these kind of rallies popping up. I think what you're seeing is people aren't just rallying about Black Lives Mattering and policing. No, Black Lives Matter in the quality of education that we give our children. Black Lives Matter in the quality of healthcare that we provide for people. Black Lives Matter in the equity that we see in working and people being able to go out and earn a living wage. And Black Lives Matter with regards to how we're reforming our criminal justice system and making sure that the justice system isn't creating a second tier or second class of citizens. So for me, education and all of those things have to be addressed from the inequities that we see across the Commonwealth and across this country, right, if we're going to say that Black lives really matter.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on. It's a great update, and we're going to continue to follow this issue. All right, coming up, how driving is changing in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Joining me, as often is the case, is Bob Latham. He's the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. He's our go-to guy when we want to talk about transportation issues. Well, Bob, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Terry. Good to see you.
Let's first go to two areas of driving that Pennsylvanians have to be deeply concerned about, and one has to do with Turnpike travel.
Right.
You're not going to find anybody at the tolling stations. You're going to be able to drive through. And guess what? If you don't have a little sticker on there that says you can drive through, you're going to get a bill in the mail. Do I have that right?
That's correct. The Turnpike has gone to all electronic tolling as of this month. There was a hearing earlier this week with the CEO Mark Compton of the Turnpike explaining the move to that. And of course, it was originally anticipated, but it was accelerated this month because, the tremendous financial pressure that the Turnpike is facing. I don't have to tell everybody the stay-in-place order has had an impact on transportation revenues, and even more so at the Turnpike than at PennDOT. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later. But the other thing is, Act 44 of a number of years ago, and then subsequently Act 89, the big transportation bill from 2013, still directed the Turnpike to send some $450 million a year to PennDOT in order to then pays for public transit operations in 67 counties, not just the Southeast or the Southwest. But that's creating a tremendous strain on the Turnpike. That plus the fact that they're down about $100 million this year already in revenue. So they're struggling even more than departments of transportation. And
imagine a 46% decrease in traffic volume. When you think about it, it's almost half.
Right. About March, April, and May, people were basically told to stay home, and so they did. When they stay home, they're not on the Turnpike and they're not paying tolls.
Hey, there you go. Well, there's another aspect of this, and it's called, I'm going to read this to make sure I get it correct, automated work zone speed enforcement. And that's a pretty big deal, and it's been in place for a couple of months now.
Well, it's going very well. Of course, we were shut down. The highway construction was shut down for about 6 to 8 weeks. At the beginning of the pandemic crisis, it restarted on May the 1st. So we're up and running and working hard and trying to accelerate these projects and save as much money and and recoup as much of the project schedule as possible. In limited areas, it is still a pilot program. There is what we call automated speed enforcement, and your viewers will know that as cameras in the work zone. So if you go more than 11 miles over the speed limit through a work zone, you are going to get for the first offense, you're going to get a warning. And the second offense, you are going to get a ticket. And the ticket on the second time is $75, and subsequent violations is $150. Sounds like a lot of money, but we think it's going to save lives. It certainly makes it safer out there for highway workers, and they deserve to have a safe work environment. And the key point there is that accidents in work zones mainly impact the people driving it. So in other words, most of the injuries are to motorists themselves. So it's dangerous. The lanes change. So you really need to. When it says 55, it means 55. Doesn't mean 80.
All right, on to another subject. We've also seen a decline and this I think is particularly important, a reduction in the resources that will go into rebuilding our roads and our bridges. And you and I have chatted about this before. That's extremely important given how old Pennsylvania's roads and bridges are. We've been a state for a long time.
Well, we joke. We say, I always quote former Secretary Mallory, we're old, cold, and wet. And
old, cold, and wet.
Old, cold, and wet, and we got a lot of bridges. The good news is we fixed a lot of bridges, but our pavements are still in questionable shape. Our primary mechanism for funding transportation is a tax based on the consumption of fossil fuels, and as we move to other vehicles that are not funded by fossil fuels, then what you're going to see is a drop off in revenue. So we're going to have to find eventually another way to fund transportation. But having said that, in the short term, we're down again about $150 million in gas tax or oil company franchise tax revenues this year, and that's going to have an impact on PennDOT's ability to improve roads in the short term as well. Now we're very cautiously watching for the June revenue estimates, which will come out the first week of July, to see what kind of a rebound that we're seeing in traffic. According to statistics, we're seeing a rebound in traffic, and that, of course, bodes well for revenues into the Pennsylvania, what we call motor license fund, or the fund that pays for highway construction.
Yeah, and it does. And we only have about 20 seconds. We're going to have to leave it there. But I'll tell you, they're not getting any better. They're getting worse. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.